Hey everybody, how you doing today? I hope that you're doing well. Today we're going to cover the tissue in lab. So don't forget that tissues are a collection of cells working together for a common function. And during this lab, we're going to have some focuses. So in lecture, we learn more of the function of these different tissues and a little more details of the physiology. And now in lab, we're going to study more of the anatomy. So what do these tissues look like? But I also still want you to have a little bit of extra information. So for this lab, how do you study the lab for the test? We kind of talked about it during the first lab, general body plan about how to prepare and what kind of questions to expect. So for this test, you need to know 4 things about each of these images that I'm going to cover, each of these tissues. The 4 things are: number 1, the name, and that's pretty easy. That's the name that's in your book. Again, you can use your images book, your collection of images book, and these images are in there. There's going to be a few more images than we're going to cover during this lab because I just don't like some of these images, and I don't think it's very educational for us to cover them. We can learn about those tissue types a little bit differently, but instead we're going to cover these 19 tissues, and for each of these tissues you need to know a name. If there's any labels, you need to know a label. Not all of them have labels. There's really only maybe a handful that have labels. But for each tissue, I also want you to know one location and one function. And now for the test, I'm mainly going to pop up an image. For example, here's our first tissue. So I would just pop up this image and I'd say, name that tissue and tell me one other fact. Okay, so there's usually 2 questions on each tissue. Every single tissue, you have to tell me a name. I don't think that there's ever a time where you don't tell me the name of the tissue. So make sure that you know the name of each of the tissues, you spell it properly, and you give the full name. And then if there's any labels, I may ask for a label, or I may ask tell me the location, or I may ask tell me the function. So usually it's a 2 questions for each slide. Here's the picture, tell me the name of it, and then tell me one more thing. Tell me that label, tell me a location, tell me a function. Okay, so whenever you're studying, make sure that you kind of study that way. You set yourself up for success. A lot of people like to use flashcards here, and they'll put some picture on the front. They'll go make a color copy somewhere, and then they'll tape the picture onto the front, and then they'll put those other pieces of information on the back, and then that way they'll kind of flip and they'll test themselves. And most people have said that's a pretty productive way of studying this. So if you need some kind of clue, that's what I've seen maybe works the most in previous semesters. So let's get at this. Today we're going to focus on more epithelial and connective tissue than anything else, and then we'll have 3 muscle tissues and 1 nervous tissue. So let's dive into the epithelials first. Again, epithelial, don't forget, is named based on its shape and its layers. And so here we have our first one, simple squamous epithelium. That means that it's only 1 cell layer thick, and the cells are very skinny. They're flat. Here's our image. This is the same image. All these images are the same ones you're going to see on the test. I'm not going to give you an image you've never seen. But here, whenever we look at this, I hope I need to give you some perspective first. When we're looking at this, we're looking down through this layer, and we're looking through it almost like it's a piece of paper. And so that piece of paper, we can see straight through it. We can see right here there's only 1 nucleus, there's none behind it. And so that implies that this is a very thin layer. It's only 1 cell layer thick, and there's its nucleus. Okay, so that's how we can kind of infer it's simple squamous. Now this is located in the lining of your lung, and it's in many places, but this is an image from the lungs or the alveoli, and its function is for absorption and secretion, here specifically of gases. So most simple squamous is going to be absorption and secretion. Here specifically it's of the gases. Next, this one kind of got cut off a little bit, but this is simple cuboidal epithelium. Now here's the problem. We need to look and we need to find, here's some boxes, right? Here is the top of that box, the apical surface, and down here's the basal surface. And we can see that basement membrane. Now, that means if here's the bottom and here's the top, this is a cell layer thick because there's only 1 nucleus in it. And these are shaped like boxes, right? So it is a simple layer, and these are cuboidal. Now, this is actually an image from a slice of some of the tubules in your kidneys. And so this is location, the kidney tubules, and there in the kidneys, again, a lot of the simple epitheliums are for absorption and secretion. This is going to absorb and secrete to create urine. Next, if we look at this, we can see that here's the bottom of the cell, here's the top of the cell, and again, only one nucleus. So that means this is a simple layer, and these are very tall cells. So this is going to be simple columnar epithelium. Don't forget, on the test, you got to give me all three terms. I will allow you to abbreviate epi, but you have to give me this epithelium. If you put simple columnar, I got to count something wrong there, right? Because you didn't tell me the full information. So make sure that you give me the full details. When we look at this, I want you to notice that we do have some labels. This cell right here is a different cell from the rest of these. You can't really see its nucleus. Over here's another one, right? These cells have an opening to the top, and they're releasing this mucus that we see on the surface of this epithelium. These are our goblet cells that we talked about in lecture. These are the unicellular glands that make mucus, and here we can even see that mucus. Now, on the surface, we also see these tiny hairs. These are those microvilli that we talked about in lectures. Microvilli, they're going to increase surface area, especially for absorption, for example, of nutrients. And so that kind of tells us that's really what this is doing. It's absorbing nutrients, and it's found in the lining of the small intestines. Now, I pointed it out on the previous picture, but I haven't really given you a label yet. This bottom line, this bottom thick region of the epithelial tissue is the basement membrane. So this is the bottom of the epi, and here is some loose connective tissue. Again, we talked about this basement membrane in lecture. So lecture, but there is that basement membrane, the attachment between the epi and the CT. Next, we have stratified squamous epithelium. You don't have to call it non-keratinized. You can simply call it stratified squamous epi. What we're seeing here is from the side, and here are several layers thick of cells. So we can see all these nuclei, and we can see them stacked on top. These are flat cells, so these are our stratified squamous epithelium. Here's kind of an outer region, and here's more of an inner region. This is actually taken from the cheek wall, the inside of your cheek, and this is mainly there for protection. Stratified, again, mainly for protection. This is the only example of stratified epithelium we're going to have. I did not give you stratified cuboidal or stratified columnar because those images are just not the best images. I don't think they're very educational. We can talk about those, though, in lecture and discuss what their functions are and where they might be located. Here's a special type of epithelium. Some refer to it as a special shape, but this is actually its own type, and it is a special shape. It's called transitional epithelium. We see this rounded shape, and this is found in areas that need to stretch. So wherever we need a stretchy lining, that's where we're going to find transitional epithelium. This is found in the bladder, somewhere that stretches and recoils every day, multiple times as it fills up and releases urine. And so that's a good location to list for that transitional. Here's a special example of layers. Pseudo stratified, kinda stratified, looks a little bit, but maybe not stratified. And that's really what it means. When we look at these cells, let's use this one for example. Here's a nucleus. Down here is the bottom. Here's the basement membrane. And if we go through here, there's only one cell layer thick, right? But whenever we look at this kind of further back, look, the nuclei are stacked on top of each other. So it almost looks like these are stacked, stratified tissue, stratified cells, but these are actually a simple epithelium. And so because it looks stratified, but it's actually simple, we call it pseudo-stratified. Now this, you can put the ciliated or not. You call it pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium because these are tall cells. But these, that is one of our labels, these cilia on the surface of this pseudo-stratified epi. These cilia are going to be beating back whatever's on the surface. And if we look closely, here is an example of a goblet cell. There's another one pointed out, but here's a better one. You can even see its duct, its exit leaving. And we can even see a little mucus dried on the surface. So that goblet cell has released mucus, and the cilia are moving that mucus back towards your mouth. And this is actually found in the lining of your respiratory tract. So this is going to beat that mucus back towards your mouth so that you can either spit it out or swallow it and get rid of it, and then hopefully help clear out the passageway. So that's pretty much a protective function overall. Whenever we talk about that mucus escalator, that's what that's called, the mucus escalator. Don't get stuck on that one at the mall if you ever go back to the mall. Here, glandular epithelium. Glandular epithelium, don't forget this is our last type of epithelium, or this is not the linings and coverings, but epithelium includes glandular tissue. And so here we can actually see this is truly just a simple a simple cuboidal layer. If you look, these are a bunch of cubes. Here's the bottom, here's the top. And so these are simple cuboidal surrounding themselves and creating a pocket. And so this is glandular epithelium. Sometimes you have to label this thyroid follicle, sometimes not. Usually that's not something that I list on a test. This is located in the thyroid gland, and that's what gives away that that's a thyroid follicle. And here it's going to produce secretion, specifically produce hormone that's in the thyroid gland. That's it for our epithelium. Now we're going to look at multiple examples of connective tissue before we finish up with the muscle and the nervous. This is our first example of connective tissue proper, loose connective tissue or areolar connective tissue. So this is an image from the subcutaneous, from some of the regions in your skin and below that, or below your skin. And this is the main tissue that connects a lot of other tissues together. So this is kind of like a super glue that likes to super glue a lot of other tissues together. Remember, when we're talking about any tissue, especially connective tissues, and we've got three components. We've got cells, and we can see these cells here in these labels. We've got fibers here. These hair-like fibers are elastic fibers, and these thick fibers are collagen fibers. And then we've got the matrix, and here in the background we can kind of see this clearish matrix. This is actually hyaluronic acid, so you may have heard of that term. I know I've heard it on some like hand cream commercials, trying to advertise hand cream, but stuff trait and it can't. So here, hyaluronic acid, and this is something that helps really super glue some of those other tissues together. Here's another form of loose or areolar tissue, connective tissue. This is adipose. See how loose it is connected together. And so these are adipocytes. These are the adipose cells. You can see it's got one big fat drop of triglycerides in there. And we can list a lot of areas for this to be found, and we can be nice to ourselves or mean to ourselves. But I thought we should list something that's functional. So I put your gluteal region on your butt, right? So there it is functioning as stored energy because that's how it got there. But we naturally have some fat there for padding and protection, and that's a very important function of adipose tissue, is padding and protection of the organs and what's surrounding them. This is dense connective tissue. This is actually dense regular connective tissue. I'm not going to show you dense irregular connective tissue, but this is dense regular connective tissue. Whenever we say regular, it's a regular pattern. All of these stripes are actually collagen fibers. So these are collagen fibers that are building strength from end to end. The structure likes to be pulled from end to end. Here we can see a fibroblast or fibrocyte. And so these now in connective tissue, these dots are cells. They're not nuclei like they were in our epi. So we can see the cells, the fibroblasts that build the collagen fibers and maintain if they become fibrocytes. Again, this likes to be stretched from end to end, for example, in a tendon or a ligament. And what does a tendon do? It connects muscle to bone. What does a ligament do? It connects bone to bone. Next, we have elastic connective tissue. Elastic connective tissue is found in locations that need to stretch, right? So we can see these dark elastic fibers in here. It's the only label that we have. So a good is the lungs. The lungs are kind of like a balloon because you use muscles to inflate them when you inhale, but whenever you exhale, you just kind of let loose of those muscles and relax them, and this elastic connective tissue recoils back, and that's really the key feature to elastic. Not only does it stretch, but it recoils. Here's our last connective tissue proper. This is reticular connective tissue. Don't forget reticular means net-like, and this looks like a net. These fibers in here that create this net-like appearance are called reticular fibers. So these reticular fibers make it more spongy, more like that foam rubber. And as I mentioned before, we may see this surrounding some organs and providing padding and protection, kind of like a thin foam rubber layer. So we're out of our connective tissue propers. We're now into our supportive connective tissues. This is our first of the cartilages. There are 3 cartilages. We are not going to cover fibrocartilage, but here this is hyaline cartilage. This is the cartilage that is found at the ends of your long bones, and basically this is the cartilage that's in your joints. The function is to protect the ends of those long bones and protect the joint during movement, assist in movement. And so these are the cartilages that someone may have damaged in a joint, like in their knee or something. This is the main cartilage, the articular cartilage, that we're going to talk about. Also, we get to chapter 9, chapter 6, or excuse me, chapter 7. Right, so the bone in the joint chapter. We look at this chondrocytes or chondroblasts, and these are actually the chondrocytes, and so these little dots again are the cells. Oh man. And so these dots are the chondrocytes. I'm having a little trouble right now trying to connect, so I'm trying to give it a minute to catch up. I apologize. Hopefully this won't take but just a second. If you're here, bear with me. All right, so I'm going to keep going and hope that this finishes up. Here we have the chondrocyte or the chondroblast, and inside of it, or inside of this bubble, and the bubble is the lacunae. When we look here, what we have is elastic cartilage. This is our second type of cartilage. Elastic cartilage, just like the name implies, is stretchable, and so it can stretch and recoil. And when we look at this, this is very similar. We can see these purple lines are the elastic fibers. We can see these inner bubbles are going to be the chondrocytes, and the outer bubbles are going to be the lacunae, kind of the cave that they live inside of. Now, this type of cartilage is found on the tips of your nose and on your ear, and these are to protect those exposed tips of your face. This is compact bone. Compact bone is the outer layer of all of your bones. It's the surface layer of bones. It's there for the protection and the support. It takes most of the weight of whatever you're supporting, whatever you're stressing. Here we can kind of see one big osteon. So here is an osteon, and this osteon is one compact. We're not going to cover spongy bone, which is on the inside of the bone. I just mentioned that this is on the surface layer. So we'll look back at spongy bone in lecture mainly, but this is an osteon, a basic unit of this compact bone. Inside is the central canal. This is where blood vessels and nerves are located, and surrounding it we see these rings, and these rings are called lamellae. Now, the lamellae are actually these little caves. These dark little holes are called again. And the lacunae are where the cells live, and the cells inside of here are the osteocytes. So make sure that you know that the black cave itself is the lacunae, and who lives in the cave is the osteocyte. Now, the last term that's on our list for labels, it's not on here, but it's on our list, is called canaliculi. The canaliculi are these rays that go inward and outward. And these connect these lacunae and these osteocytes so that they can all support each other. So that finished up our connective tissues. Now we have 3 muscles before we look at nervous. This is our first muscle, skeletal muscle. This is also referred to striated muscle, and if you look, you can see why. These bands are referred to as striations. And if you remember, something else that we talked about in lecture a few times is that this is one of the only multinucleated cells. So here we are looking at nuclei again in these dots, and these are multiple nucleuses in this one type of cell. So this is a dead giveaway. Big striations, multiple nuclei, we're dealing with skeletal muscle. This is found attached to your bones, attached to your skeleton, and it gives us our overall body movement, helps us move around in our environment. This is cardiac muscle. It almost looks like dried blood to me. So that reminds me of the heart. Here we can see these thick bands. Remember, that's something that we mentioned in lectures, that these thick bands are called intercalated discs. And these intercalated discs are important to connect all of these cells together so that they all function as one big unit. Now, we also mentioned that we can see some kind of medium striations, not major striations, but some still kind of slight striations here in this type of tissue. We mentioned that in lecture. This is found in the heart, and its function is to pump blood. This is our last type of muscle, smooth muscle. Smooth muscle, we don't really see any striations. We do see these cell nuclei still, but we don't really see any striations. So this is smooth muscle. Don't forget, we find it in the walls of tubes in the body, and it's going to control flow through that tube. Here's our last one, nervous tissue. When we look in here, we can see these spider-like neurons. So these are the only label that we might have. And this is located anywhere in the nervous system, brain, spinal cord, nerves. And again, its function is to produce and distribute action potentials. All right, y'all. That's it for the tissue lab. I hope this worked. I worked through my technical issues, and it's still recorded. And if you have any questions, please contact me through email or however, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great rest of your day.